Oh, dear God, we are in darker places than we've ever known, than we've ever wanted to be. Our usual strategies of coping aren't working. We are lost. We are afraid. We are fresh out of answers. Oh, God, light the way for this whole heart-heavy earth, for the helpless and the hopeless, for those drowning in grief or fear or depression, for the tired and harried, and those at the end of their rope, and those who aren't. And for me too. God, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Spirit, have mercy. The thick of dusk hath fallen, and betrayal seems the order of the day. Tonight is the night when love itself was handed over to brutal ignorance and cunning that loves deceit. Our God chose to feel what we feel, to be spit on, ridiculed, tortured, and to die all alone. In his outstretched arms on the cross, are you gathering to yourself every hideous thing, every failure, travesty, and wrong? Blessed are we who say, yes, take this pain, turn things right side up again. The day love died, something new was born. And may we be a people open to the grief, the loss, and then, yes, the rising of the sun. We, God's people, have gathered together this Friday night to remember that Friday night so many years ago, where Christ went to the cross and suffered on our behalf. We also gather here today to remember our own sufferings, as 2 Corinthians 4:17 says, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving in us an eternal glory that outweighs them all. We have asked some of you to share your sufferings, to share how Christ has been present to you in sufferings, that when we gather as God's people, we do say that out of suffering comes life, and out of death comes resurrection. So today might be a little different of a service that you've ever been to. But as you listen to the sufferings of your friends, and as you bring your sufferings here in this place on your own, may they be engulfed by the cross of Jesus Christ, who suffered for us. To start tonight, I'm asking that we would all read Psalm 23 together in unison. The Lord is my shepherd. I will not be in need. He lets me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for the sake of his name. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. Certainly goodness and faithfulness will follow me all the days of my life, and my dwelling will be in the house of the Lord forever.
Most of y'all know us, but we're Brandon and Leah Barker, and this past year has been pretty trying. February 16th of 22, Ellie came home and found Leah where she couldn't exactly make sense of her words, and so she loaded her up in the car and gave me a call and said she was taking her to the hospital. I met him at the emergency room, and Leah could walk in, but she couldn't talk. And they told us that she had had a stroke. She went into surgery that night, and some friends of ours, Carolee and Chris, brought Grace up there, and Dr. Duarte said that she would be probably not able to walk or talk if she made it through. Before we'd seen him and got that much information, I had texted several people and asked for prayers. And I think God working through that is probably one of the reasons that she's still here. Chris asked me about how God has worked through this. It's been a long year, and we've gone through a lot. But although this caught us by surprise, it didn't catch God by surprise. He laid the groundwork for us to get through this, starting 36 years ago. Just in the people that he brought into our lives, in the girls that he gave us when we were having a hard time having kids, and the friends that we made. Is all those people came together at this time and supported us, and where we had to go away, they took care of our girls. They just picked up and did what we couldn't do. Somebody told me this during the early days that, for whatever reason, God's not through with her yet. And so she's still got work to do.
They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." He said to them, "Stay here and keep watch." Going a little farther, he fell to the ground, and he prayed that if possible, the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will."
When I have more questions than answers, when the dawn seems distant in the darkness, Jesus, let your Spirit speak softly. Oh, to feel the trust you felt in the garden where you knelt. Let me live the prayer of Gethsemane. Let my life reflect the words formed there upon your tongue. Let me live the prayer of Gethsemane. Not my will, but thine be done.
We read in Isaiah 53, "Who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He has no stately form or majesty that we would look at him, nor an appearance that we would take pleasure in him. He was despised and abandoned by men, a man of great pain and familiar with sickness. And like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we had no regard for him. However, it was our sickness that he himself bore, and our pains that he carried. Yet we ourselves assumed that he had been afflicted, struck down by God, and humiliated. But he was pierced for our offenses. He was crushed for our wrongdoings. The punishment for our well-being was laid upon him, and by his wounds we are healed."
My name's Robert Markell. May 7th, 2022, last year, I fell from a piece of farm equipment, suffered a severe injury, which resulted in the next 2 months of ICU and intensive care hospital to get through it. I don't remember much of the first stay in the hospital, Dale Seaton in Austin, due to the medication or just the condition that I was in. But at the point where I gave up on myself, other people never did give up. As time went on, I realized that maybe the only reason why I'm alive today is only by the grace of God. Some of the doctors did amazing things. They'll claim that they saved my life, but I don't believe that. I think it is only by the grace of God that I survived that fall. He showed compassion for me. He did not leave me when I needed him most, and when I gave up. Psalms 4:3 tells you that the Lord will hear you when you call. He not only heard me, but he heard everybody at our church. I was put on the prayer list at Southland, which evolved into being on, I believe I was on every prayer list in every church in San Angelo, which went, I don't know if you say it went viral. I was on a prayer list in Dalhart, to Paris, Texas, to El Dorado, Texas, Lubbock, Austin, every town in between. I had people praying for me. People that I didn't even know were praying. So God does hear us when we ask, and when we say a prayer, he hears us. One of the first things I remember was Marvin Hall, James Majan, and Joe Favor coming to the Encompass Rehab Center and praying for me. And it was the first time that I probably was coherent enough to understand what was going on around me. And we're talking 6 weeks after the accident, which is totally amazing to me that the men leaders in our church would take the time of their day to show up at a hospital to spend their time on me, which is truly amazing. So as you start thinking about things, and the things that happen in our lives, or my life, and what I've lived through in the past, and why this was so difficult. It kind of makes you wonder, is God out there? Does he care? And I hate that I went through this accident to finally realize that in my mind, that yes, he is alive, he does exist, and he does care for all of us. It's not just me, but he did pick me out individually and save me from myself, basically, what I did to myself. So for everybody in this church, everybody that prayed for me, I thank you, and there's no way I can repay you. It's just amazing. The power of God is alive and it's well. He is risen.
And when they led him away, they seized a man, Simon of Cyrene, and as he was coming in from the country, and placed on him the cross to carry behind Jesus. Now following him was a large crowd of the people and of women who were mourning and grieving for him. But Jesus turned to them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, stop weeping for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, days are coming when they will say, 'Blessed are those who cannot bear, and the wombs that have not given birth, and the breasts that have not nursed.' Then they will begin to say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?" Now 2 others who were criminals were also being led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on the right and the other on the left. But Jesus was saying, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they cast lots, dividing his garments among themselves. And the people stood by watching. And even the rulers were sneering at him, saying, "He saved others, let him save himself, if this is the Christ of God, his chosen one." Then soldiers also ridiculed him, coming up to him, offering him sour wine, and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." Now there was also an inscription above him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged there was hurling abuse at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other responded, and rebuking him, said, "Do you not even fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed are suffering justly, for we are receiving what we deserve for our crimes. But this man has done nothing wrong." And he was saying, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise."
I am Sybil Dodson. This is my story. In 1985, Gary was diagnosed with colon cancer, already in stage 4. The next 2 or 3 years were very difficult. It was trips back and forth to MD Anderson Hospital. The cancer kept spreading to other parts of his body. Even though I had been told Gary did not have long to live, I had felt I had him for always. In spite of all his suffering, I felt myself clinging to the hope God would heal him or there would be a miracle cure. It wasn't until the day I was told he was to be dismissed from the hospital the next day to come home and have the care of hospice. Max came home from Baylor to help me as I continued to teach. Alvina, his mom, came frequently. Friends from the church also came. What a blessing. I was working late at a school fall festival to raise money for McGill when Max called me that Gary had gotten worse and wouldn't last much longer. I came home. Marta Smiley, Alvina, his mom, and Max were with him. Dr. Dodson soon came, and we were there with him at his death. Kelly was in medical school, so he and Gay were on their way and soon arrived. What was I to do? I felt numbed. It was a shock. How would I cope? I thought of the verse, 1 Thessalonians 4:13. I want you to know what happens to a Christian when he dies, so that when it happens, you will not be full of sorrow as those are who have no hope. And many of you know the rest of my story. Dr. Dwayne Dodson had lost his wife to breast cancer just 4 months before Gary died. Kelly, my oldest son, and Gay, his youngest daughter, had married in 1985. Therefore, when any of our children came home to visit either one of us, we could go back and forth to each other's houses. Dwayne would come to help me with outside chores. We began to talk and share our grief and sorrow about our losses of our spouses to each other. He began to come by for me to bring me to church. Our friends here at church were cheering for us and saying that they liked to see us together. This all brought about our marriage. We were married on Christmas Day, 1989. Martis and Jeannie came to what I called my house then. Martis performed the ceremony with all of our 6 children and just 3 grandchildren at that time. My mother and Dwayne's mother-in-law were present. I was married to Dwayne for 25 years before his death. Those were happy years. Keeping up with our growing families, traveling and spending time in Colorado. I was blessed again with a fun-loving Christian man. In the last year of his life, Parkinson's made it difficult for him. When he died, I had the same painful grief feelings as before, and I miss him greatly. I feel our time together and our marriage was a witness to God's providential care. I have been blessed twice. As I end, I think of what Chris told us a week or so ago. God knows and feels our pain. Just as Jesus wept at the grave of Lazarus, he weeps with us.
Forgive us, Lord,
for the times you run to us with arms extended. we pass you like a stranger on the street. We want status, so we fail to be your servant. Forgive us, Lord.
Forgive us, Lord. The Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and rich in love. And He has carried all our sorrows, and with His wounds delivers us. For the bread and broken body unremembered, the forgotten sins that cost you everything, for the smallness of our faith when you're so faithful. Forgive us, Lord. Forgive us, Lord, for excuses that disguise a heart that's wicked, for the darkness that we love more than your light. We are guilty of devotion that is shallow. Forgive us, Lord. Forgive us, Lord. The Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and rich in love. And He has carried all our sorrows, and with His wounds delivers us.
Reading from Isaiah 53, 6 through 12. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He has oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before the shearers is silent, he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living for the transgressions of my people, and he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong.
is Ernestina de la Cruz Pena, and this is my story. Incidentally, de la Cruz means of the cross. God has been in my life since the time of my birth. I was the fourth child born to Reverend Juan Pedro de la Cruz, baptized at 9, and was 12 years old when my young life changed forever. My father was to deliver an invitation after a church viewing of the movie, The Cross and the Switchblade, on a Friday night in Pleasanton, Texas. After the service, the Jimenez's family's car broke down, so my father loaded our family and theirs into our station wagon, and all 15 of us traveled in the night from San Antonio to Carrizo Springs to make it in time for Reverend Jimenez to preach on Easter Sunday. I woke in the hospital to a shelf filled with stuffed bunnies and Easter baskets. My parents, along with 2 of my brothers, died that night. My oldest sister died 9 days later in the hospital, and I was given the chance to say goodbye, although she was in a coma. I suffered from a broken leg and facial lacerations that would later heal, and my other 3 siblings survived their injuries as well, except Alexander, who faced the most repercussions from the accident. After I knew my father had passed away, and while in the hospital, I turned my life over to Christ. And from that point on, I relied on him to be my father in everything I do. He has been my rock, and my life has been his from that day forward. I had accepted the Lord, but it took on a different meaning when I surrendered my all to him. He has guided me and directed me in my service to him. For his word says, "Be strong, for I am with you." Haggai 2:4. Once we recovered, my uncle, Jose, and his wife, Nadine de la Cruz, who had 1 son of their own, were willing to take 4 orphans into their household. He insisted on keeping us together. We were raised in Winters, where all 5 of us graduated from Winters High School, until we went on to seek our professions. I attended college at Howard Payne University. During this time, I began dating my childhood sweetheart and longtime friend, Henry Pena, who was attending Angelo State University and was from Ballinger. Henry and I were from neighboring towns, both involved in church youth groups, so our families knew each other well. He proposed, and after our wedding on December 20th, 1975, we moved to San Angelo. We had 2 daughters, Allison and Audra, and 1 son, Adrian. Then came my second tragedy, along with millions of others, COVID. We took precautions and cared for his mom through the pandemic. Then shortly before Thanksgiving, he contracted COVID. He was placed in a coma, and after several weeks, he passed. His memorial was held on what would have been our 45th anniversary. My Southland church family prayed for us and were there for us. I attended grief share classes, joined a support group called the Coffee Sisters, who have all had significant losses, and helped me along with my family and faith. Many times I've questioned why the Lord took him and not myself, since Henry had better credentials. He was able to talk to total strangers in such a special way, while I could not do the same. His passing has left a big void in our family. However, it comforts me to know that he is with our Heavenly Father and not suffering anymore. Then recently, on March 5th, I lost my Uncle Jose, who raised me. He battled cancer to the very end. He was also a man of faith with the biggest heart for those in need. Jose's example has been a template for our family. In 1974, at 20 years old and a freshman in college, I wrote a follow-up article to our tragic story in the San Antonio newspaper. And it read like this: "After the accident, I wanted to reject God and resented him for having taken my loved ones. It was natural to want to dwell in self-pity, that this was a punishment of sorts. For years, I blamed myself, but I began to listen to advice from the people who loved me. Why did he spare my life? It was a miracle that I survived, and I owed it all to him. I turned everything in my life over to his will. I consider what he has done for me every day and depend on the strength of his spirit to build my spiritual life. In one particular hymn, it states, "This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine, and he can be yours as well." Thank you.
While in the upper room, Jesus said to his disciples, "Greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." When Jesus was arrested, tried, and sentenced to die on a cross, he demonstrated his great love for us. Pilate said, "What would you have me do with him?" "Crucify him," the crowds answered. Pilate said, "But I find no fault with him." But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." Seeing that he was getting nowhere, he handed Jesus over to be crucified. So Pilate had him flogged and handed him over to be crucified. Soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. They knelt before Jesus and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Then they led Jesus away to the place called Calvary. There they crucified him with two others, one on the right hand and another on the left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother and the disciple whom he loved. When Jesus saw them there, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And there came a darkness over all the land. The sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was torn down the middle. Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Having said this, he breathed his last. We pray as Jesus taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not to temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever.